Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this support event for teachers of BTEC Performing and Production Arts. My name is Paul Webster and I'm the Subject Advisor for Performing Arts and Drama Qualifications at Pearson. Joining me today are the Senior Standards Verifiers for Performing and Production Arts and our special guests from One Dance UK, Tori Drew and Laura Nicholson, who will be sharing their ideas on how to teach dance in the current climate. This session aims to provide you with guidance and support for teaching BTEC Performing Arts in this academic year. We are recording the event and we will be able to share it with you and those unable to attend tomorrow. Due to the number of teachers attending today, it may not be possible to answer all of your questions. So if you have a specific question relating to your centre, please send it to me after the event. I will give you my contact details at the end of the session. If you're having any audio issues, which you won't be able to hear me now, could you please test your audio settings and that should help. In terms of this session, it's Tuesday the 29th of September, and at this point we are still awaiting confirmation from the DFE and Ofqual in regards to any changes that can be made to the requirements of the qualifications in regards to external assessments and overall qualification modifications. Today I am going to share an overview of the proposals with you. We've also released guidance on how teachers can make adjustments to internally assessed units and components, and this can be found on our website using the link that's on the screen. All of the links from today's sessions are available on the screen for you to download, so any link that you see will be on the Word document that's attached. We will share with you any new developments as guidance as soon as we can. We will put information on our website on the subject pages, plus we share information through email updates on our communities page and the subject page for drama and performing arts, and through social media such as Facebook and Twitter. The purpose of the session is not to offer training, but to share ideas that performing arts teachers may use to approach the new challenges of developing skills, creating performance material, collaborating in groups, and performing or designing for a live audience, all whilst maintaining the social distancing and hygiene guidance and rules as set out by the government, DFE, and your individual school leaders. So let's have a look now at the latest news. As we know, external assessments for BTEC were cancelled last year and centres were required to submit actual and estimated unit grades to use for students registered on the BTEC courses. Following on from the results issues for GQ qualifications, we made a decision to review the grades we'd awarded to BTEC students. Although this meant a delay in students receiving their qualification grades, it allowed us to ensure that students were given appropriate grades for internal and external units, and we hope that your students were finally awarded suitable qualification grades. For this academic year, as I said, we have sector guides to help you with teaching and learning. By the 23rd of October, these guides will be updated with the detail of our assessment adaptations for 2021, which leads on to our proposals for the assessment adaptations. We know you want to confirm arrangements for assessment this year, and we're keen to support you through this. I'm now going to outline this approach we propose to take in adapting our BTEC qualifications, including those on performance tables, to help you and your students reduce the impact of lost teaching and learning time while meeting any public health concerns. We have submitted this proposed approach to Ofqual and the DFE for review, and we expect to start issuing final details of our adaptation approach for all BTEC qualifications by the 23rd of October. So the principles underlying our approach to adaptation are as follows. All content needs to be taught so students are prepared to progress to their next educational step. Centres should teach and assess mandatory units first. All learners need to complete external assessments and mandatory internal assessments. Some qualifications will have a reduced number of assessments based on their structure and purpose to free up time for teaching and learning. Where appropriate, some external and internal assessments will have adaptations to the evidence required to reflect continued disruptions and public health guidance. In addition, we will ask centres to bank learners' achievement through internal assessment grades on our system through course delivery, rather than waiting to submit grades at the end of the academic year to mitigate against any further disruptions. So this is what it will look like in terms of applying the principles, these principles to the qualifications. And so for the RQF Nationals, those released from 2016, there'll be no changes to the certificate because there's only 2 units. But on the extended certificate and the foundation, it will be possible not to do one of the optional units. And on the diploma and the extended diploma, it would be 2 optional units that students wouldn't have to do. In addition, for performing arts and production arts, we expect to adapt the external assessments through the reduction in the required assessment evidence, which I will tell you about in a moment. For level 3 QCFs, there would be no reduction for the certificate. There would be a 10 credit reduction for the subsidiary diploma and the 90 credit diploma, and a 20 credit reduction for the diploma and the extended diploma. So please note that these are proposals. This is what we've submitted to Ofqual. They haven't yet approved them, but this is what we would like to happen. So fingers crossed we can move ahead with this. For level 2, for the TEC award, with our TEC award, it's 100% mandatory content. So what we're proposing to do is to streamline the requirements of the components rather than remove them. So what this would mean is that we would reduce the amount of evidence that students would be required to submit. I can't go into the details of this yet because it's not been signed off, but basically students for components 1 and 2 would be able to submit less work than they are usually required to do. For the first awards, it would be that there's a reduction in one of the optional units that wouldn't need to be assessed. So these proposals are focused on those students who are completing the course in summer 2021. So that is the focus at the moment, and any other changes in regards to what happens for students who will be completing in summer 2022 is something that we will let you know about, but these proposals are focused on the students who are completing this year only. We are also proposing a reduction in the assessment evidence required for the following external units. So at level 3, it would be units 3, 5 and 7, and for the TEC award, it would be for component 3. And what we are proposing is that there is a reduction in terms of the amount of work, i.e. the quantity and timings that students would have to submit, and potentially a shift in terms of group sizes. So we've proposed something that hopefully will provide a safety net for your students if they are unable to continue to work as they normally would when looking at component 3. And we will confirm any changes by the 23rd of October. So in terms of the changes around group sizes, the idea being that hopefully it would allow students to be able to submit solo work, pair work as well, or instead of group work, but this is still to be confirmed. So that's the latest news, hot off the press. I hope that's now clear for you in terms of what we are intending to implement, and we hope that Ofqual will be able to agree to these changes. Let's have a look at other latest news now. And in terms of standards verification for this year, we will be releasing the guidance on the SV process by half term, because this will include information on how many units or components need to be sampled this year. I've been getting a lot of questions recently from teachers regarding standards verification of any units or components that were submitted with centre assessment grades in the summer. So if you did submit a centre assessment grade for a particular unit or component and we agreed it in summer, it now means that the grade is now fixed and you don't need to do anything else with this in terms of you won't need to submit evidence of the CAG grade work for SV sampling. If any of your students were unhappy with the CAG grade that has been awarded in summer and they're continuing to work on the course this year, there will be a process for them to be able to resubmit work. They'll be able to have another go at trying to get better grades. And the details of this process will be in our centre guidance release later this week. In terms of OSCA materials, so standardisation materials, these will be available to download from Edexcel Online from next Monday, so the start of October. In terms of DCMS guidance, as well as your own centre decisions about safe working practices and performing arts, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport have detailed guidance documents which are regularly updated. Later on, Tori and Laura will be talking about some of these elements, and they also have a wonderful dance risk assessment form that can be used as it is or adapted for acting, musical theatre, production arts, etc. If you have just started one of the BTEC Performing Arts courses or you'd like a refresher, we have a collection of recorded guidance sessions from our SSVs that you can access via the link on the screen or from the handout that's in your materials pack today. The training packs cover the Level 2 Performing and Production Arts Industry Skills, the TEC Award in Performing Arts, the Extended Certificate in Performance at Level 3, the Nationals in Performing Arts, and also the Production Arts Practice Foundation and Extended Diploma. And we will have a Performing Arts Practice one available very soon. So that's the latest news. Now we are going to hear from our senior standards verifiers on their suggestions and guidance for how you might approach particular disciplines. We're also pleased to welcome Tori Drew, who is the Dance in Education Manager at One Dance UK, and Laura Nicholson, who is Head of Children and Young People's Dance. So they will be talking about dance practice in the current climate and how best to support your dance students a little later on. We'll also be looking at some suggested resources for accessing online recordings and support. And we will end by sharing the ways in which you can contact us for further information. Please note that this is a performing and production arts support session. We won't be covering music because music is a separate sector and has a separate support. So if you are needing support with music, then I would suggest that you contact the subject advisor, Jeff Hole. His email address is teachingmusic@pearson.com. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Sally Dewars, who is the Senior SV for Acting and Musical Theatre, who will talk you through some of the ideas about how best to support your students working in some difficult situations. Over to you, Sally. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you. I was just trying to unmute my mic there and it took
Sorry.
absolutely ages, but it's done now. I was just about to type you a message and scream, but okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Paula said, my name's Sally. I look after acting and musical theatre. In this presentation, I'm going to really talk mostly about drama and a bit about singing because I'm going to let Heidi sort of run with the dance aspects of musical theatre, okay? And what I want to do really is to talk to you about focusing on what we can do. There's an awful lot that we can't do at the moment. There's an awful lot. And I think, you know, we do need to make sure that rather than sort of stressing and getting ourselves really worked up about the fact that we can't do X and we can't do Y, let's just think about what we can do. Now, I'm very much aware from a lot of the questions that come in that some of you are stuck in classrooms, that you're stuck in a classroom, in a science lab, in a computer lab, with your students sitting behind desks, unable to move, and you are essentially delivering from the front and can't sort of move around them. If that's the case, obviously that is going to limit quite drastically the sort of drama work that you can do. Now, I know a lot of you have moved towards looking at monologues, which is a very good solution, absolutely, but I'd also like you to maybe consider an idea which is looking at audio drama, or what we used to call radio drama. The good thing about looking at audio drama is it does focus on the voice, but it allows learners to work in groups rather than just simply individually. Okay. In terms of radio drama, there's lots of there are books around that you can sort of get off the internet, or, you know, the usual places that you buy that sort of stuff. But there's a massive library of scripts in BBC Radio's writers' room. I've basically, there's a link to that there, and I'm presuming it's also in your pack. These are essentially downloadable scripts. You can download them. They're good for personal use, for educational use. They're accepted as professional repertoire, so there's no issues whatsoever if you're doing a unit where, for example, students should be doing rep. And they're very flexible. Because these are specifically radio dramas that were commissioned by the BBC, lots of different types, lots of different genres, some by very well established writers, others by new writers as well. Most have fairly small casts of between 2 and 6 performers, which means that you can actually put kids into groups. If you had various different casts working on the same script, it means if you essentially, if you're losing kids, if you've got kids in and out all the time, you can kind of work with that as well. The lengths of the performances tend to be between 30 and 60 minutes. So you could, if you wanted to, try and go for a full play, or you could do extracts. Some have some really good accompanying blogs from the writers. Some actually have various versions and drafts of the script so that you can see the way in which they've developed. So if you are, for example, doing level 3 qualification and you're wanting to look at something like a script writing unit, I'm aware some of you may be sort of looking at units that you've never really considered before, mainly because looking at units that can be adapted for working either in a blended way, remotely, or indeed in a socially distanced way. So again, this is a great resource if you're looking at students doing script writing, maybe doing directing as well, because you could have them in pairs or in threes as a cast plus a director. Very suitable for blended learning as well, because obviously once you've got the scripts, you can get them printed off, the kids can take them away. A small number of these, the more recent ones, also have recordings of the professional performances of them. Not all of them do, but to be honest with you, not all of them do within the BBC site, but if you start sort of fishing around in other places like YouTube, you may very well find that you can actually find sort of audio recordings of these, which of course means that you could also do them for something like component 1 if you wanted. Okay, next slide please, Paul. Some of the ones to consider, I had a quick look through these and came up with 4 that I thought, well, you know, depending on a class of students, if I had them, would be quite useful. There's a nice one called Welcome to Our Village, Please Invade Carefully. Think of the Archers meet sort of a science fiction drama. It is a comedy. You can download from the link I had on the previous slide the pilot episode of this. So again, it could be a really good thing if you didn't actually want to do a scripted piece, get the kids to read through it, and then also look at it as a hopping off point for maybe a piece of devised radio drama. Another one which I thought was really good, it's called A New Cycle of Mystery Plays. It's by various different, I think there's about 4 or 5 of them. New Testament stories reset in the contemporary world. So again, good for teaching historical context and that idea of context. And like I say, these would be quite good, I think, for sort of lower level students. Most of them have casts of about 5 or 6. Another one, one that would probably be quite good for maybe your year 13s, for your level 3s, is a one called Breaking Up with Bradford. It's quite a nice one because again, the cast in this play are all quite young people. It's about a university graduate returning home after doing his degree. And then there's a nice one also here called Home Front by Kitty Williams. And again, this is a drama series. It's a serial rather, charting life on the home front during the First World War. Again, you could just pick up the pilot episode, you could pick up another episode, or you could get learners working through that. So again, thinking about audio scripts, I think is a really nice thing to consider. Just to get them away from just constantly maybe doing monologues if you are kind of trapped in a space that really doesn't allow you to get up and move around. Just something about that. And you remember, you know, we are very aware. A lot of us are in the same position. I know a lot of drama classes have been just basically put into classrooms and you've been told to just make the best of it. Remember that you can still assess students for audio work. We can adapt that. If they are doing monologues, they can do it. They can do them seated. It's not a problem. And I do think, you know, we really need to consider just what we can do rather than worrying about, but they can't do X, Y, and Z. As Paul said earlier on, it's important that this year the learners get the best possible experience we can give them despite what's going on. So in one respect, we're thinking about, yes, getting them through the units for the qualification they are doing, so that you can get through standards verification, so that you can get them through the external units, so they can actually get the certificate at the end of it. But We also have to think about the fact that some of these students will then be progressing on, maybe onto drama degrees, maybe onto musical theatre degrees, maybe into further education onto level 3. So it is about trying to provide them with something that is as imaginative as we can make it. So again, the scripted work from audio drama, I've just listed some of the units, and this is by no means all of them, that an audio play would be suitable for. Again, Tech Award Components 1 and 2. Component 1, if you can get hold of a recording of one of those, it would be great for that. And of course, the nice thing about that is if you have got learners in and out, it's much easier to record an audio recording onto something like a CD for them to take away with them to listen to. Level 2 first, it would go for, you could do an audio drama for your unit 2, which is the sort of the group performance unit at the end. For unit 3, unit 15, which is scripted. Level 2 industry skills is a new qualification this year that some of you may be on. It's an off measures post 16 level 2 qualification, and again, unit 1, which is developing skills, unit 5, which is preparing for performance, and unit 6, which is a performance project. Level 3 nationals again, unit 2 or 24, depending on the version you're doing. Unit 6, final performance to an audience. We would accept a audio drama for that without any trouble. Also for the new 2019 nationals, A1, A3, B4, B6, H possibly as well, and quite a few of them for our level 2 QCF nationals as well. Assessment evidence could include, if you can, video milestone rehearsals. I think it's quite useful because it's useful to see what students are doing. But if all you end up with is the audio recording of the final performance, then that's also a very useful thing. And like any other performance projects, learners can still do things like logs, blogs, video logs, etc. Something about evidence, and I know I'm going to hand over to Heidi for dance in a moment, and she will be talking about, sort of generating and gathering evidence. And I think what is really important this year is that you gather stuff as you go along, even if it's not the final performance, even if it's just a rough run through, because it is much easier for yourself and for us to be able to assess and to verify when we've got something for each learner, rather than if we've just got nothing at all, because while we were going through it, we didn't get as far as the final performance, and therefore we don't have any evidence. So please just keep gathering evidence as you go along. Keep it safe, and you've got something. Okay, we can work with something. It's much more difficult for us to work with nothing at all. Okay. So like I say, whether it's logs, whether it's blogs, video logs. Another thing, there seems to be a concern about the fact that, well, if learners are completing work at home, we can't use that for assessment. Absolutely, yes, you can, particularly if they are maybe doing a performance at home and recording it on their mobile phone or on a tablet, if they've got access to that. We can see it's them. You're going to sign a piece of paper to say it's them. It's absolutely not a problem. But if you have got some learners within your group that really haven't got access to those sorts of things, then, making sure that they've got a bit of time in school in the centre to be generating and for you to gather that evidence is also really, really important. Okay, next slide, please. Moving on to things like devising work, non-scripted work, creating work. Again, working in classrooms, it's ever so difficult. But I mean, what we can say is, maybe looking at projects where you use the actual physical space they're in and the furniture that you actually have and they've got to stay in as a sort of a starting point or a setting for a devised piece of drama. Maybe considering places where people are normally fairly static or seated, two people on opposite ends of a park bench. transport, sitting on a bus, the audience at a theatre, cinema or sporting event, so actually it could be a piece where it's all about the audience watching something and their reactions to it. Interviews, job interviews, interviews on television, those sorts of things, TV news programs and chat shows. There's lots and lots of different settings that you could use for devised work if you wanted to go down that route. Because what we really do not want is to find that students have spent a whole academic year essentially just looking at monologues, rehearsing and learning scripted solos and not an awful lot else. So try and be imaginative in terms of what you can do. Okay, next slide please, Paul. If you are lucky enough to actually be in a studio and to be able to do work where learners are able to stand up and maybe move around, even if it is just in their own little personal square or circle that they're in, remember that, you can look at selecting warm-up exercises and activities that can be conducted on the spot or in limited space. Maybe considering performance pieces where performers are in different locations. As Paul said, on Monday, you will be able to access the Oscar materials. And for the Level 3 2016 exercise, we do have a piece of drama, a full piece of drama that was done totally with learners in isolation. Now, they performed this all in their own houses, but it equally could have been recorded in isolation with them all in different spaces in the studio. In fact, that was what the students were intending to do with this piece last year, and then it ended up that they were actually in different locations. Consider acting on or acting for camera projects as well, where learners can record sections remotely or in a socially distanced way and then contribute to the final group piece in terms of the planning, the rehearsing, giving each other feedback while watching, stuff like that. Remember, if you're going to use props, ensure they are the responsibility of the learners. For example, they could be brought in by them and then basically taken out and put away at the end of the session. Or if they are props that you are providing, do make sure that they're cleaned and or left for some time before they're used again, because obviously we've got to be really careful in terms of transmission. Okay. I'm just noticing there is a question. Social distancing in classrooms, they could interact with each other. Yeah, absolutely. They could interact with kids in other bubbles, through sort of just basically contributing separately to a piece. Okay. We then come on to singing. Now, singing is a real headache for us this year. In terms of singing, outdoor spaces are of a significantly lower risk than indoor spaces are, okay? But obviously it's starting to get chilly outside now, and some of us kind of might have missed the boat for that. Remember, if you are going to do any singing indoors, you need to use the largest room available with the smallest number of students possible, essentially, because the 2-meter rule needs to be significantly increased when it comes to singing. If you are going to look at doing singing, also remember ventilation is really key. So opening the windows, putting up with the drafts is also very important. On this slide, I have included a link to quite a good article that I found, which is generally, it's not necessarily for performing arts teachers, but it's generally about singing in school during the COVID. And it does talk about, in a lot of detail, about what's safe, what's not safe, etc., etc. But obviously, you do need to be really careful for that. We move on to the next slide, please. So when it comes to ensemble singing, when it comes to solo singing, again, remote teaching and assessment could be possible. So it could be that you record yourself or someone else demonstrating vocal exercises and repertoire, and learners watch that. You could record backing tracks for learners to practice with, either at home or if you're lucky enough to have practice rooms that they can go into on their own, using those. Learners can be recorded singing at home or on their own in a school practice room, and we are quite happy to take that as evidence of rehearsal and of performance work. And obviously these recordings could be played back in class, reviewed, and feedback provided. Okay, but obviously we accept the fact that for some of you on musical theatre, the amount of singing they're actually going to be able to do this academic year is going to be very, very limited, and we are just going to have to work with that in terms of assessment, etc. In terms of musical theatre repertoire, again, if you're in the studio, you can you can do some repertoire, but again, staging musical theatre repertoire is particularly challenging at the moment, and combining song and dance in a kind of a live performance may not be feasible. It may be that you're having to teach dance and singing skills completely separately. We'll be talking, and Heidi will be talking about dance later, and really the ability to kind of assess learners in their ability to combine that and sing as they dance, as they act, may be just impossible, in which case we are going to just have to make allowances for that. Okay, you will in your assessment, we will as well. Vocal and singing work could be rehearsed and pre-recorded separately, so that you can then use it as a backing track for your dance and movement, or it may be that you're using backing tracks of professional performances for the dance and movement work, and then the singing work is recorded separately. For musical theatre work, and I'm going to hand over to Heidi in a moment because she's much more skilled in terms of dance, but do consider repertoire, and there is repertoire where dancers are essentially fairly spaced. I really struggled with this slide. I was going to say spaced out, and I thought, no, that means something entirely different. But if you think of things like, for example, Now from chorus line, One from chorus line, where essentially they're in a line and they don't move out of line during that. Obviously, maybe spaced a little further apart than they would be in a normal kind of situation. Also, things like Nowadays, Cell Block Tango from Chicago is very good. I mean, Fosse work generally is quite good. Okay, so just looking there, yes, to clarify, for musical theatre, you can record separately for the dance and the singing. You probably are going to have to do that, because you certainly can't have students kind of moving around and changing direction in any way when they're singing. If you are going to do singing indoors, essentially the guidance is normally that they all either face front and they're well distanced apart, or even that they're in a circle but facing outwards. But they certainly, you know, can't be turning left, turning right, etc., to keep up with the choreography if they're also belting out something from a musical, because it just wouldn't be safe. Okay, so like I say, look for repertoire where dancers are essentially working in their own space, or where they're essentially in a line and they're not sort of moving in and out of each other, is what I'm saying for musical theatre. Okay, I'm not sure whether I'm finished now. I might be. Next slide. I think I might be.
You are finished now. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
No problem at all. And I just think if I can leave you with one thing, it's just try and focus on what I can do, rather than worrying yourself sick about what you can't do. We are all in the same position essentially, and we will make the best of this year for the students. Okay, thank you. And I'll hand over to Heidi now.
Thank you very much, Sally. That was informative and useful, and some really good tips there. We have Heidi McEntee waiting in the wings with bated breath. Heidi, are you ready to take over?
Yes, I am. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Can we move on to the first slide for me, please, Paul? Okay, so I'm sure you've seen this across social media, but put across a little better. Maybe we're all on the same ocean, in the same storm, but in different boats. And whilst this on Facebook or whatever, on social media, has been about individual experiences from last March, I think this certainly rings true for our professional experiences. So each centre, we've got the same rules, the same guidance to adhere to, but how that practically translates to individual centres can be wildly different. And this can also be true within centres, so subject to subject. Whilst all subjects have been disrupted, dance and the performing arts may be the subject suffering a little bit more than others within some centres. The differences in centre experience is vast. So last academic year, some of you will have continued to teach your courses successfully online, including both practical and theory. Some of you may have just focused on teaching and learning activities only. Some of you may have managed to get an assessment done. Others may have focused on theory work only. And likewise, with whereabouts we are now, you could have lost your studio space to other subjects or activities. You could have taught for a week and are now doing remote delivery due to isolating. So same ocean and storm, different boats that we're all bobbing along to. So one of the things I think is important to note before I get on with it is that socially distanced dance classes have been taking place across the country from the summer holidays. So gyms and swimming pools are also open and the physical education is still going on. So if you are someone who is encountering a lot of barriers to being able to deliver your subject and qualification, hopefully something I say here will help you a little. So I think first of all, know the rules and the guidance. And I know this is incredibly difficult with such a changing landscape. So this is why we have the wonderful organisations such as One Dance UK, who will be talking to you later. And it's really worth visiting or attending their webinars and visiting their website regularly to keep abreast of the ongoing developments. The Art Council website is also good for signposting guidance, which would apply to aspects of our vocational delivery. And you can also access the guidance from the government website, as you know, where there are sort of several different areas that we kind of piece together how we're approaching the delivery of dance. So we also have the dance guidance from ourselves, which has outlines how internal assessments can be delivered. And I do think it's really worth downloading it and reading through. If your centre has put you in a classroom and told you to teach theory until COVID is over, what can you do? So first of all, I think give your managers, your senior team, all the information on how dance can be delivered safely and reassure them that it is happening. Can you give them some examples? So nearby schools or private dance schools, it's really important that you keep your managers in the know too. So are their decisions based on the most current guidance? As we all know, it is so easy to blink and miss a development. This may impact on what you're being allowed to deliver. So it's really worth going back to it and seeing, have things changed? What's going on now? However, if you may have lost your dance space to other things. So how do we teach dance under these restrictions? So it's just down to how your school's organising things. Some of you may have opted to deliver theory all of last term and you were all theoried out and wondering how to get the practical done in a classroom. And the first thing we think of is roses. But unfortunately, even with roses, to teach dancing at this time, you do need that bit of space for them because their breathing does increase and it starts to shift towards that sort of singing element. Yeah, so you do need a bit more space, and sort of clearing the classroom furniture may not be enough depending on your numbers. So this is where you can flip your delivery. So normally we would deliver the practical face-to-face with written work and self-evaluation being the homework. Flip it. Practical happens at home, discussion, feedback, analysis and evaluation takes place in the classroom. Approaching it this way may also mean that learners can continue to learn through potential future lockdowns or isolations. If you are unable to deliver socially distanced practical classes, teaching movement content then becomes a pre-recorded activity which is shared with your learners. And how it's shared with your learners is dependent on the resources available to you, your centre and your learners. A shared secure drive where learners can access the videos is one way, burned DVDs is another, and it may be that you're using a number of different methods to support your learners. Recording yourself or remembering your team breaking down the movement content will allow you to focus on specific motifs and phrases week by week, which can then be tied together at a later stage, either remotely or face-to-face. This approach will allow you to conduct skills development and rehearsals for a performance. An important aspect here is that learners record themselves and share with you their recordings, and this will enable you to monitor and feedback on process. This can also provide the evidence you need to conduct assessment or to evidence levels of ability should you need to later on in the academic year prove that that learner can do what you think that they can do. It's important, I think, to note that some of you may encounter issues of safeguarding with learners recording themselves, and I think it is good practice with any remote delivery to run through best practice with your learners for online conferencing and meetings. So considering the location of the recording and the background, in terms of our industry, recording ourselves for an audition is something that we do quite a lot and is increasing. And therefore, learning how to prepare our backgrounds and space in a way that upholds our professional integrity is a vital part of learning within the performing arts. If learners recording themselves doing your set exercises off-site is not an option, then they will need to do the practical work in the centre for you to video record. In a classroom with all the furniture pulled back, this would mean planning milestones which would be staggered for the cohort. So you don't need to say my milestones are on this day, that day and the other day. It could be that your milestones are every day. You take a bit of one person one day, another person another day, and you're just collating that evidence as you go along. Obviously, if you were doing it in that approach, the guidance on socially distanced dancing would apply. So with smaller spaces, it is gonna be that less kids can dance. The final piece of advice here is to risk assess your cohort, and if you can only deliver socially distanced dance classes to a handful of your learners, you may have to select those who you feel are at more risk in terms of practical achievement to not have those classes. Or, for example, some of your learners, they may have full internet access and a variety of electronic devices at home to access all the videos you can throw at them fully, and some may not. Some may have been attending private dance classes since August, so are continuously developing their skills, and some may be totally new to dance or only dance in your centre. So you may be looking, you'll be looking at your cohort and saying, how can I tailor that? I mean, you are going to be taking differentiation to a whole new level this year, I think. Can we go on to the next slide? Yay, fab. Thank you. So now in dance, our assessments can be divided as such: theory and understanding, skills development, rehearsal and performance, and creative work, so devising and choreography. All of these can be completed through the remote, blended, or socially distanced approaches, but it is important that you access as much help as you can. So is there a media or IT department that can help you? If you're having to record yourself and burn DVDs or put things onto a USB, then is there somebody there that can be helping you with these things rather than you taking on absolutely everything? I think it's important as well to differentiate here between internal assessment and supervised conditions that we would normally see in many of our external assessments. The most important thing is that learners' work is their own for internal assessment and that they sign a statement authenticating their work. In addition, assessors check that the work is the learners and sign a declaration on the assessment record to confirm this. How the evidence is produced can be on site or remote, as long as you, as the assessor, collates the evidence that is used for the assessment and stores it so that you are able to provide the evidence for standards verification. In other words, it does not matter whether it is you holding the camera or their mum. What matters is that the content and the evidence is the content and that the evidence is stored at your centre. Whilst you really want to be moving along the assessment side or developing practical skills, please do bear in mind that there really is no harm in watching more dance or learning about another dance style or practitioner if you have to deliver more theory work. Dance appreciation and exposing learners to more professional dance can only support their creativity and understanding of where they want to progress to too. So don't be hard on yourselves with that. So you have to spend the last couple of classes watching, I don't know, the dance routines from the newsies, and that's as far as you can go. That's awesome, and they should be watched. So you're revising the theoretical side of the component 3, and you're referring to work that you've looked at in component 1, and that will only go to benefit them later on. So what I'm trying to say here is that there will have been value in what you have provided to your learners during these difficult times. What's clear through all of this is that contact work is not happening, and learners will be working very much individually for the time being. And now I know that some of you have said that you've got bubbles so that they can actually interact. That's brilliant. But if you're maintaining that socially distanced approach, then it is going to be very much them by themselves, or groups where they're doing sort of unison movement and exploring some choreographic devices that can be explored apart. Yeah, so creative work will need to take into account the distance between them, and this also could be a time to explore dance on camera and employ methods such as the storyboarding, video recording and editing to develop creative work. The traditional dance showcases will most likely not be taking place, and it may be safer to have your learners perform to the camera with you and maybe a colleague in the room, and that's okay. It could be that their audience is the camera. Again, that is okay. What's important currently is that you have the evidence of the learners dancing. Postponing all assessment until we have until later on in the academic year, I do advise against this. And I think it's about collating as much as you can when you can, whether that is an assessment of waving my fingers about my head at the moment, an assessment, or it's just some of the teaching and learning activities you've done, and you just need to just capture it and keep it there just in case. So I think just get as much evidence as you can from your learners as you progress. Moving on to the final bullet point, I think it's fair to say we have no idea or control over what will happen over the next couple of months, and it will affect delivery. When you look at the duration of a performance piece, for the majority of specifications, we say as long as the learner has a chance to access all the criteria at pass, merit and distinction through the work, then we're all good. For example, in the TEC award, there is an unofficial suggestion of 2 minutes for the duration of the performance in component 2. But centres can do whole evening length pieces or a short solo audition piece. The important thing is to think about quality over quantity. 3 hours of level 1 work will not become level 2 because they did it for 3 hours. It will remain level 1. In other words, a minute and a half of rep is better than not recording it because you haven't got to the 2 minutes yet. I suggest recording, as I've said before, the milestones, and so that you, if learners have to stay at home, you have some of their recent work to show. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Paul? Right, so in terms of rehearsal and performance, for those of you who work with units where you do not need to perform repertoire, there is a plethora of dance classes where they teach class choreo, which you might find helpful if you want to avoid recording yourself. So even linking short routines that they've learned a little bit here and learned a little bit there to make a larger one, that could be used. And I think there are so many tutorials of class choreo online on YouTube that you could piece together a routine in one way or another with that. For those of you who deliver professional repertoire for the TEC Award, QCF and NQF Level 3, and have been racking your brains for works and how to approach this, I have a few ideas listed here. And before I go through them, potentially you could complete the same repertoire you have before, but with learners either performing socially distanced or performing it as a solo. Where they have in the past, where there's been contact or group work, minor adaptations can be made. But as with previous guidance, if you have to adapt the work quite a lot, it is worth considering a different piece. So therefore, you are looking at solo repertoire or group performances where the dancers perform as individuals with little interaction between each other. I also think it's worth noting here that learners don't need to do the same performance work for the same assessment. So you do not have to have the restriction of everyone doing the same piece of rep if there are some learners more suited to a particular piece but not others. So this slide looks at some ideas which may suit level 3 delivery, and the next slide looks at some that could be suitable for level 2, but though this is always really difficult to say because it really does depend on the extract and the cohort. So we've got harmonica. Oh, can we go back to the, thank you. Harmonica Breakdown, which is a modern solo dance created by Jane Dudley, really back in the day. It is quite nice as a solo. Probably not the most, with all of these, they're probably not the most exciting for your students. Some of them are, I think. Smoke by BTEC is a pas de deux which contains solos and duets. The work is quirky and challenging but achievable. Your learners may not do a Sylvie Guillaume extension of the leg by the ears, but they can adapt that, so they don't need to be doing exactly what the dancers in the piece have done in that respect. So if she's got her leg by her ear, if we can just get our leg at a 45-degree angle with nice alignment, then that's fine. So there will be with that piece some adaptation needed. Again, Jellicle Cats and the Jellicle Ball both can be performed as solos and with small tweaks socially distanced as well. Seize the Days from the Musical Muses is advanced choreography but very enjoyable. There are a lot of groups running into the space, so some more adaptation would be required. It may be that there's short extracts are taken from it. Yorktown and My Shot from Hamilton are also good options, and these have videos online teaching the movement content, so that's always a bonus. If you have access to any of Paul Taylor's works, his modern choreography contains there's a lot for potential use. The 3 pieces, Company B, Fields of Grass and Musical Offering, contain solo work which could be used, and the Bugle Boy of Company B is challenging but will be fun with the music, I think. My final suggestion for this slide is Lady Gaga at the Super Bowl, and her performance draws on a lot of the choreography in her videos, but it's tamer for the family audience. Extracts from different pieces could be performed. So, and a lot of the time, the dancers are performing individually in unison to amplify the choreography in the stadium setting. And this approach to choreography for stadiums may be somewhere that you could look for inspiration. Let's go on to the next slide, Paul. Thank you. So these pieces are a little bit more accessible to level 2s in terms of level of demand with the movement, but they're also, again, it may not be their cup of tea. As I've said, suitability will depend on the cohort. So we've got the classics here with Bournes, the Nutcracker. It contains a lot of suitable material. I would suggest the Gobstopper dance or the Cupid's dance. Cupid's dance is a bit more difficult, but it's not too long. Okay. A great one could also be the character of Bottom in Sir Frederick Ashton's The Dream. Now, this lends itself more to a character performer, but can translate well into written form as well, so they can write down what their steps are. There are 2 sections that I think are suitable. There's short solo dance he performs once his head is changed, and the dance, it's on point, but can be successfully done on demi-point. The second is the dance towards the end of the piece once he's changed back to himself, and this can tie in with C1 quite well. We've then got Roses, it's the classic. The chair dance can be very successfully completed socially distanced. I've put Flesh and Blood on here by Lee Anderson. It's a quirky one, but if you are really stuck, if you really are stuck in a classroom and you can't get out, and there is a section in here called the Jones section, I think it's called, which repeats the same sequence 3 times. And the choreography is static, and it's for the upper torso, neck and head only. It's very precise. So Lee Anderson has choreographed the eye movement, the tilt of the body. So it's challenging in a very different way to sort of Muses, and you know, the lovely jumps with the arabesque. But if you're stuck in that classroom I think it does repeat 3 times, but it's a very different challenge to the others. So, you know, even if it's an activity that you do and you record it, you just got it in the bank, just ready, just in case things go absolutely pear-shaped and the piece that you wanted to do, you know, doesn't come through. I love it. So there's also all the Fosse. I've put all the Fosse. There's plenty of work out there in his repertoire that can be performed socially distanced or as a solo. Again, You Can't Stop the Beat from Hairspray is a great one, as they can identify with the movement vocabulary more, and it will, like I've said before, it will translate to the written form well, so they can write down what they're supposed to be doing. They can make notes on the structure of the routine, and they can name certain movements, and that will support home rehearsals. The accessible movement vocab it may be accessible, but it's performed at pace and with strength, so it is challenging. I've got there one from a chorus line, again, challenging, precise, but a good one for learners who need the structure in their movement, so they're moving from position to position. And then finally, and I keep on saying it at every event I do, Janet Jackson's Together Again. It's a lovely sort of 90s feel of, they hit positions and they move through those positions. There is a live performance of it. It's obviously not live, it's not live now, but a video recording of a live performance. So it helps to fill in the gaps that the music video has, because the music video is kind of interspersed with a lot of animals and close-ups, I think. So if you do use music videos, and you can do for some repertoire, there's some great choreography out there. It can be helpful to find a version of a live performance of it from an award ceremony or a concert to help you fill in the blanks. And it's often, so with, say, like Lady Gaga, the choreographer, Ricky, oh, forgotten his last name. It's as if I know him. Ricky. He created the pieces for the videos, the music videos, and then he put together the stadium performance. So it's often the same person that's involved in pulling that all together. So it's all done. Our guidance for professional work has been work that's been created by and for professionals. I've also given some suggestions here. I know some of them are pretty old school. There's some great resources out there, and I think just recently Qcf has shared a tutorial on how to perform the rave from Grand Finale, and I know that Bourne has some tutorials as well out there for his work too. I think they're great starting points to get the work, to get those initial phrases kind of covered, and then you could kind of fill in the blanks after that. Okay, so my final words. Here we go. What you used to spend on costumes, set, lighting, PRS for live performances throughout the academic year could go on something else this year. Also, what learners need in terms of support and resources has changed under the current circumstances, and that is definitely something to discuss with your centre. Can you reconsider your budget? Can that money go to supporting your learners in this new normal instead? And then your planned assessment may not go as hoped. You may have to change your assessment plan, and you may need to offer extensions. You can do this. Just update your assessment plan when this happens and ensure your lead IB signs off the changes. The only thing to be wary of here is what I've raised earlier about avoid delaying assessment. later in the year, or we're not ready, let's do it next week, we're not ready, let's do it next week. Avoid that, because you just need to get the evidence. And yes, you can do it next week, but you just need to get it done. Also, I think get done what you can as soon as you can, basically, is the message. And this is also important to be thinking about evidence. Evidence. All of your teaching and learning activities, keep the recordings and the written work on file, and because you may need it later on. It's also worth mentioning here that the evidence needs to be held securely at your centre in case you, as the dance teacher, can't go into the centre. Also, if you label your video files clearly, it will help if someone outside of your subject area has to collate some evidence on your behalf. And finally, read the dance guidance from Pearson if you haven't already. The guidance goes into detail on what units can be completed, remotely blended and socially distanced for each qualification, and gives ideas for how to approach them. In a nutshell, the only internally assessed unit that cannot be completed in any form is contact improvisation from the legacy Qcf qualification. Otherwise, it's how we select, deliver and support our learners, which will be different. So that's me all done. I've not looked at the questions as I've been rambling on. I do apologise, but if there's anything that I see, I'll kind of answer as we go along. But that's me done, Paul.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That was absolutely fantastic, and some brilliant ideas there that I'm sure will be really useful. And the questions that have come in, there were a lot of people who were listening to what you were saying and agreeing with it and talking about other works that they've used. So I'm not sure there are any outstanding questions. There's one actually from Joe that's just come through. Can you confirm where the Pearson Dance Guidance doc is? That is in the links in the document, in the Word document, in the materials section of this event, Joe. So if you download that, you'll be able to access the materials. Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you, everyone.
As we before we move on to our special guest from One Dance UK, who will talk more about dance practice and safety that can be implemented this year. We are going to hear a little bit about production arts now. Unfortunately, our SSV, Mark Edgington, hasn't been able to join us today, having some technical difficulties, but in his place is the Principal Standards Manager for Performing and Production Arts, Rob East, and Rob is going to talk us through some of his ideas. So over to you, please, Rob.
Thank you, Paul. Hope everybody can hear me, and I apologise if this is rough and ready. I'm literally going to be reading off Mark's slides because, as Paul said, Mark unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon. I would advise before or you go any further, any of you who are teaching and delivering production arts at any level, if you've not already accessed it, please do look at the delivery guides we produce for production arts, which are available through the links that Paul has already mentioned. These contain specific guidance at unit and qualification level. Obviously, production arts is a very diverse sector in terms of different skills and different disciplines. So obviously, within the 10 minutes I've got here, we can't provide the extensive information you might need. And obviously, I'm anxious that you want to move on and listen to Tori and Laura from One Dance. So anyway, the key principles that Sally and Heidi have outlined with performing arts apply to some extent with production arts. But obviously, as we're dealing with very different kinds of operations, uses of equipment, and different disciplines, there are different considerations for performing arts that you should be aware of when it comes to social distancing and safety, and the ability, obviously, to manage the units you're delivering. So firstly, obviously, we're strongly advising production arts does have strong industry body representation in the sector, and where possible, do keep up to date with the guidance produced by Creative Skill Set and by the union BTEC, referring to their websites where they give constantly evolving guidance on the use of equipment, personal protective equipment, and so on. We've already discussed to some extent the downside of too much solo work on these qualifications, and the same to some extent applies with production arts. Although a majority of production operations can be done more or less in an individual and in a bubble, We do obviously have many units, particularly the mandatory units at all levels, that require some kind of interaction, group collaboration, and group management of production projects. So we're recommending, where possible, using video conferencing, where, for example, teaching time means it's not possible to convene within the centre, and you can catch up for that lost time through the use of video. So, for example, production team meetings, directors' briefings and so on can be held through Zoom meetings and through MS Teams meetings. And they're a good opportunity to disseminate key production information and share things like production design, schedules, props designs, risk assessments and so on. These online team meetings can also be recorded and captured as evidence. So when it comes to assessing units, that is actually valuable things you may have in the bag when it comes to producing assessment evidence. With all our production qualifications, okay, learners may not be in physical contact to the extent they would normally be expected of dance students and acting students, but there are significant considerations for hygiene in production arts. So, for example, where they're using technical equipment such as lighting desks, sound desks, use of regular disinfecting, making sure that any materials that are in contact with the face or body are used only by the one person, for example, props and costumes, should be bagged up after use until they're safe to reuse. Makeup is a particular problem, and obviously we have many centres delivering makeup qualifications at the different levels. So we should be aware that, for example, the use of brushes and use of sponges and so on into makeup products is not itself hygienic. And where possible, we should be looking at individual makeup sets used with individual performers, not in any way shared. Learners applying makeup should be using PPE, protective masks and visors, and similar rules would apply to hairstyling. As said earlier, work areas such as sound and lighting desk, where possible, should be safely distanced. And when learners are working on construction tasks, tools shouldn't be shared without regular disinfecting, and workstations should be, again, adequately distanced unless sessions can be staggered, allowing learners to come in individually at set periods. Many of our units require crewing operation, that's stage management, assistant stage management, and so on. These activities can still go ahead, but obviously social distancing would need to be applied, and taking particular care when working backstage and in wing spaces, which are traditionally very limited and obviously traditionally very dark. Looking at the lost time in teaching, any production learner, whether they're looking at lighting skills, sound skills, design skills, or construction skills, will require specific resources, and it is more than 100% likely they won't be able to do this at home. So again, staggered lessons where individual learners can come in at set times to work with particular equipment, maybe with one-to-one tuition, may be necessary, and this will require careful planning. There are possibilities, obviously, for teachers to signpost training websites, and there are a wealth of videos and online resources detailing the work of production arts practitioners, for example, makeup designers, costume making, and so on. And these sometimes can include how-to tutorials and guides that maybe you could be using to set your learners to be working on remotely when they can't be in the centre, or when they're waiting for access to equipment when you can teach them directly. Where units require a production or a performance in front of an audience, as we said earlier on, the actual audience in this aspect can be a tutor, or it can be a recording to an audience that will view the work on camera, or indeed an online streamed event. And again, production arts events needn't necessarily be theatrical performances in the traditional sense. To practice lighting skills and design skills and sound management, sound production skills, learners could be working on setting up live art installations and Sonair Lumiere type displays in order to be assessed on those skills without the need for an actual performance with dancers or performers. As Sally and Heidi have said, and Paul's mentioned, we would keep reiterating that in these exceptional circumstances, it's beneficial to ensure that any practical work that can be should be captured and retained on video. In the event of future lockdowns, you may need that evidence in order to supply the evidence to all the units which maybe couldn't be completed should there be a lockdown or should learners not be able to come into the centre. If you're able to access the delivery guides for production arts, you'll see that we've broken down each of the qualification levels into specific units. So just to give you a kind of flavour, some of the centres are still delivering the NQF Level 2 2012 production arts qualifications, And in here we have mandatory units, for example, an external unit which requires actually a solo production presentation, so there's no issue there of social distancing. But in units like mandatory unit 2, preparation, performance and production, we would encourage where possible some kind of group collaborative work, drawing on the online resourcing, the online meetings that we talked about previously. So there's potential for group collaboration online during the preparation process, and then in the realisation of that production, socially distanced and safe practiced work can be taking place in the centre to actually assess that production, rather than having to rely on something being done 100% remotely. Moving on to the Qcf qualifications, and many of you are still delivering the legacy production arts qualifications, and we still have some of the smaller qualifications available to centres. Again, focusing on the mandatory units, online recorded or socially distanced productions can be developed. Where possible, group collaboration can be achieved remotely and blended with socially distanced studio and workshop activity taking place on site. Many of the core units are about production arts planning, so you could be capturing milestone footage of team meetings where planning sessions are taking place, designs are being agreed, schedules are being agreed, and so on. Many of the units on the Qcf mandatory are ideal for delivering remotely, like performing arts business and historical context of performance. There's no reason why they shouldn't be done individually by learners off-site. And moving on to the Tech Awards, component 1, again, it's largely about the understanding of production, the work of production arts practitioners in bringing a production to life. It's very suitable for remote learning. Teaching and learning can be in class, it can be a remote activity, or it could be a blended approach of both in-class teaching and online teaching. Most practical exploration for this component can be carried out as part of teaching and learning, delivered remotely or socially distanced in centres. And for the purpose of this component, it's obviously not necessary to submit video evidence of practical explorations. What we're looking at is how those practical explorations have informed the learner's understanding of the work of production arts practitioners. Component 2, far more practically based, and as we said with the other levels, centres may need to consider a blend of socially distanced studio and workshop work in small numbers of students, small clusters, collaborating on developing the production elements for a performance. Individual skills development in design and construction can be undertaken remotely or socially isolated, socially distanced within centres in order to access the necessary equipment and resources. So I think I've come up to exactly 10 minutes here, which is what Paul's anticipating. Obviously, do please access the guidance we produce production arts, and if you've got any specific questions for the Senior Standards Verifier Mark Edgington, please do post them, and Paul will make sure they are forwarded as necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. Really, really good of you to step in at the last minute and provide that guidance. Really useful, and really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to hand over to our very special guests, Tori Drew, the Dance and Education Manager, and Laura Nicholson, Head of Children and Young People's Dance at One Dance UK, who will be talking us through all the guidance and support that they are providing in lots of different contexts at the moment. And we are very privileged to have them here with us today. So thank you so much. Tori and Laura, over to you, please.
Thanks, Paul. Can you put me on the next slide, please? Right, it's a slide before, Paul. You just skip one forward. Oh, it doesn't seem to be there. Never mind. So good afternoon, everybody. We are honoured that we've been asked by Pearson's Performing Arts to join this webinar. I'm Tori Drew, Dance and Education Manager, with my colleague Laura Nicholson, Head of Children and Young People's Dance at One Dance UK. One Dance UK is the sector support organisation leading the way to a stronger, more vibrant and diverse dance sector. We are the Subject Association for Dance in Schools. One Dance UK is also a membership organisation. If you're not already a member, then please join. Together we're stronger. As the Subject Association for Dance, we'll be discussing considerations for the dance sector. If there might be considerations for acting and singing within this section, but if you have any specific questions, please contact your specific subject association for more details. We are here to outline government guidance and also give you considerations for dance within social distancing. Please note that public health is a devolved issue. Keep in mind that guidance for dance activities in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales varies. Government guidance will evolve with science. No one has all the answers. As medical and scientific understanding of coronavirus disease is developing, we are learning together. Read the relevant government guidance, use creativity, consider the resources available to you and discuss ideas with others to address guidance within your centre. Social media are great forums to inspire ideas. However, please note your employer guidance and rules supersede anything else. We hope that your centre look to you as the subject expert. So hopefully today we can empower you to go to your senior leadership team to input how dance can be safely delivered in your centre. Next slide, please, Paul. So first, we're going to be looking at the government guidance. As I said before, this is evolving science, which means guidance is updated regularly. England updates the same web page, whereas Northern Ireland and Wales brings out a whole new document. So make sure you reference the most recent document. We are not discussing Scotland today as we have no Scottish centres with us. Please note that the school guidance in particular go up to the age of 18. So even if you're a sixth form centre, you still need to reference the school guidance. For England, we're going to look at the Department for Education's guide, the school one, and the outer school one, and then looking at the Department Digital Culture, Media and Sport guidance of performing arts and sport. Wales looking at the school guidance, performing arts guidance, sports guidance. Yes, this is a lot. And Northern Ireland looking at the school guidance, performing arts guidance and the sports guidance. Thank you. Next slide. So first of all, looking at groupings and bubbles, and remember I'm talking in particular to government guidance. England and Northern Ireland return to school guidance all state that students need to be kept in separate bubbles and maintain social distancing, but it depends on the children's ability to distance, the layout of the school, and if groups can keep separate while offering a broad curriculum, especially at Key Stage 4 and 5. From this, you interpret the guidance that dance in schools does need to be socially distanced. Wales recommends that students are to be grouped and emphasise avoiding contact between separate groups as much as possible. The England full school guidance for outlines that extracurricular clubs, for example, after school dance clubs, children are kept within their year groups or bubbles. If this is not possible to maintain the bubbles, then you should use small consistent groups of no more than 15. Now this is for your after school extracurricular clubs. For those who bring in freelance dance artists or companies to teach part of the BTEC or teach rep, then schools are able to work these outside teachers as stated in the England full school guidance. They'll ensure that they keep their distance from students and the staff of the school. England and Wales state that schools should minimise the numbers of temporary staff entering the school premises and centres, so you may wish to use longer assignments of these staff. Northern Ireland highlights visitors attending school should remain subject to public health advice. Next slide, please. Space. In terms of contact, England full school guidance recently was updated to include the performing arts. They state, performing arts builds confidence and help children live happier, more enriched lives and discover the joys of expressing themselves. And this is in the government guidance. However, they do state there may be an additional risk of infection in environments where singing, dance and drama takes place. So take particular care in music, dance and drama lessons to observe social distancing where possible. In the Wales school guidance, it highlights that schools and centres must do everything possible to minimise contact and mixing. It is likely for younger learners that they will emphasise on separating groups, and for older learners, it will be based on social distancing. For learners old enough, they should be supported to maintain distance and not touch staff where possible. The Welsh Performing Arts guidance, in which centres can reference, highlight the need for social distancing and avoid contact. Northern Ireland states adults should be supported to stay 2 metres apart. For children and young people, the requirements for social distance can be relaxed, but a protective bubble strategy should be applied for years 1 to 10. However, centres should endeavour to implement as much social distancing as is practical. The Northern Ireland guidance actually says that you need to increase distance and decrease interaction. In England, the Grassroots Sports and Gym and Leisure Guide recommends markings on dance studio floors, but in relation to the space you have. As a dance teacher, you may want to consider 2 metre by 2 metre boxes with or without the space in between these boxes. But you should look at your space and realistically think how many students can safely maintain social distancing, remembering that 2 metre social distance is marked from the centre of the body. If more intense activity or more intense dance is to be carried out as a risk mitigation, it may be a consideration to have 3 metre distance. For those working with students with disabilities, think about the positioning, colour contrast and size of your distance markers. Consider maybe using tactile tape. You may want to provide audio and visual cues for students who cannot see or hear information. Cleaning of your space is essential. Everyday cleaning products are fine to use. As a dance teacher, you may want to ensure your school can timetable for cleaning between different groups. Northern Ireland Performing Arts guidance state that dance studios may require increased cleaning schedules or the ability for studio users or students to clean the area themselves. The level of cleaning required will be informed by factors such as style of choreography, level of occupancy, and the duration of the lessons. But however, teachers should make their own judgment of this. Grassroots sports and leisure guides state that you need to allow for sufficient break time between classes held in the studio in order to appropriately clean the studio and for ventilation. There is not a recommended time in the guidance, but UK Active state that this could be a minimum of 10 minutes for England, and Northern Ireland, they recommend 30 minutes. However, we know that this may not be realistic for our schools and centres, so consider other risk mitigations such as ensuring the room is well ventilated, avoid high intensity activity, and maybe if the students are in bare feet, ask them to sanitise their feet. For those who are losing their studio or asked to teach in classrooms, you may want to use other spaces such as outside. Some schools are brought in marquees for dance, or maybe ask PE to use their indoor space when they're not indoors when PE are outdoors. If you have to use a classroom, it might be part of the dance lesson to create a routine of how the furniture is moved to the side and cleaned afterwards by the students. Make it part of the dance. In terms of performances in England, the full school guidance from England states that you can follow the Performing Arts guidance for advice on live performance. The Performing Arts guidance has 5 stages in terms of live performance. We are currently on stage 4, where social distance indoor performances can happen. However, please note in a school setting that you should initially follow the school guidance, because this is from the Department for Education and this supersedes everything else. Next slide. Masks and getting the students out of breath. For England, the government is not recommending universal use of face coverings in all schools. Year 7s and above, which are not under specific local restriction measures, will have the discretion to require face coverings for pupils, staff and visitors in areas outside the classroom where social distancing cannot be easily maintained, such as corridors and communal areas. In Wales, in classrooms where control measures are in place, the marginal benefit that may be gained by the use of face coverings has to be balanced with the likely negative impact of learning experience, including hearing and social communication. Wales will have to check their local council on rules to do with face coverings. Northern Ireland state face coverings must be worn in staff rooms during adult meetings lasting more than 15 minutes and by adults visiting the school site. Given the risk mitigations in place in schools to limit and contain the spread of COVID-19, face coverings are generally not recommended for the school for this routine of use of schools. Staff and pupils may wish to use them during the routine school days, such as the corridors. In terms of droplet transmission, there has been many questions around the suitability of getting the students out of breath in dance. This is up to the creativity of the dance teacher. If you can make the dance class technically harder, but physically easier, this will be helping the dancers. If you are doing a higher intensity class, maybe have a shorter practical section to the class. There's been evidence by Sport England that children and young people have been doing a lot less physical activity during lockdown, and therefore having a shorter class or a lower intensity class will help them build up to their fitness levels more gradually. If you are using a higher intensity class, then again, think about the 3 metre distance rather than the 2 metre distance. Keeping a room well ventilated will help to lower the humidity of the room to help lower the risk of transmission, but also watch the room temperature. Make sure the students don't get too cold. One Dance UK recommend that dance studios should be around the 21 to 24 degree mark. Air-conditioned rooms are not particularly effective, but opening windows, opening the doors to exterior, in the building to the exterior doors, so there's a good airflow coming through that hallway into your classroom, is an effective way of clearing micro-droplet airborne particles. Next slide. Changing room kit and equipment. England and Wales school guidance state that classroom-based resources can be used and shared within bubbles. These should be cleaned regularly. This means a ballet bar can be used within a bubble as long cleaned before and after. The same with props. If props or equipment is rotated between bubbles, then allow them to be left unused and out of reach for a period of 48 hours, 72 hours if plastics. England School Guide recommends the Association for PE for advice on PE. Although we are here to discuss dance at Key Stage 4 and 5, as dance sits in the Key Stage 3 PE curriculum, it's good to reference them. The Association for PE states if changing rooms are used, these should be cleaned after every lesson with markers inside to keep everything social distance. Also, if possible, the students will come in school or to your centre in kit. Consider not allowing sweat towels in your studio space. The rationale is that the risk of cross-contamination and increased risk of transmission. Somebody could use sweat towel to wipe their face and then wipes the equipment, potentially increasing the risk of transmission of the virus. Water fountains are okay to be in use. However, you should put up signs to make sure that no one does face-to-tap drinking, and they are to be only used to refill your bottles. Northern Ireland school guidance recommends children to come in their kit as well, and also Wales recommends that learners try and bring little and minimal equipment to school. Next slide, please. Footwear versus bare feet. There's been many questions from dance teachers about appropriate footwear for dance in these times. There's been cases where teachers worried that bare feet act as an additional touch point and have changed to using socks in dance. For students, it might be a consideration to keep bare feet, except for when it's essential, such as ballet will need ballet shoes or street dance will need trainers. It's important to note that COVID-19 is a respiratory virus and is not transmitted through sweat. However, we realise that bare feet can act as an additional touch point, just like trainers. But as a risk mitigation, you can ensure floors are clean between classes, maybe feet are sanitised before and after class, and ensuring students sanitise their hands after taking their shoes and socks off. We feel that you need to balance the risk of transmission of COVID-19 with the risk of slipping, as the Safe Dance Practice book outlines why socks for children and young people are unsafe in terms of shock absorption, stability and friction, and socks can create slippery patches, which is a slip hazard. Bare feet can also be considered because remember that also trainers and shoes are also a touch point, just the same as bare feet. But if you are asking students to bring in trainers or shoes for dance, make sure they do bring them separately in a plastic bag. If you are to take the classes outside or in a sports hall and a dining hall, please be aware that your students need to have suitable footwear. Maybe the trainers that they usually do outdoor sports or PE in, but just be aware that floor variability rather than the hardness of the floor have a greater influence on injury. It's best to take out high impact jumps if you're using hard floors. I'm now going to hand over to Laura, who will go away from, well, I'll stop talking about government guidances and she'll be telling you all about the considerations.
Great, thank you, Tori. And hi, everyone. It's really great to see so many people here. And I know you've been on this call for a really long time, so I'll try not to take too long. So as Tori mentioned, our work is dance specific, but we do hope that many of the considerations will be useful for those of you delivering other pathways. So the next few slides that I'm going to cover will focus on supporting you to plan and deliver appropriate class content, specifically the use of contact work, floor work and travelling phrases. And we'll also mention some creative options or considerations that you could explore when planning and delivering dance lessons for your students. And it was really great to hear earlier the advice to focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do in a dance lesson. And we'll definitely be sticking with that theme. But before we go on to those considerations, I do just want us to take a moment to consider why physical activity and creative subjects are perhaps more important now than they ever have been. And therefore, why it's so important that we all work together collectively for the safe return of practical lessons and practical dance content and practical content in other art subjects for the benefit of our students. So pre-COVID, if we can remember those times, dancing education was already in a rather precarious position. It had been in decline over a number of years, and it had been somewhat squeezed out of the curriculum in many cases. On top of that, the Children's Society had identified that around 1 in 10 children had a diagnosable mental health condition. And on top of all of that, according to Diabetes UK, 20% of children were obese upon leaving primary school. So a pretty bleak picture. And then, of course, lockdown happened. So as we now return to teaching our students, it's really important to note that according to Sport England, there was a decline in physical activity for children and young people during lockdown, with 43% of children and young people doing less than 30 minutes physical activity a day, and 7% of children doing no physical activity whatsoever during lockdown. So as we go back to our dance lessons and our arts lessons, we're not suggesting, of course, that dance or the arts can single-handedly cure a mental health epidemic or an obesity epidemic, but I'm sure everyone on this call recognises that the arts subjects have a huge number of positive mental and physical health benefits. So we must, of course, place safety and safe practice at the heart of all we do, but we also have to be advocates for the importance of practical activity in our centre. And for us, that goes beyond just getting them through their qualification. It's a wider life issue. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Paul. Great, thank you. So first of all, looking at contact work. So before we talk about contact in dance, we're just going to talk about first aid, because we know that so many practical subject teachers in schools are also first aiders. So if a student is injured during a session, it is acceptable for a qualified first aider to provide and administer first aid. Excuse me. So in those circumstances, social distancing would not need to be maintained. Moving on to think about contact in a dance context then. So current guidance states that outside of a professional training environment, contact work is advised against and should be avoided where possible. So when teaching an exam specification or a syllabus, such as a BTEC course, you may have concerns over whether your students are expected to perform or create contact work, if that's something that's usually required in the specification. And you will need to refer to guidance from Pearson or other exam boards on that specific issue as and when that's released. And I think Paul said there's more guidance coming out by the 23rd of October on that. In dance genres where students are required to be in hold or have physical contact, in relation to the current guidance, you do need to consider how this can be avoided until social distancing measures are reduced. So some teachers are choosing to focus on technique and building specific skills such as strength over this first term at least, as so many of our dance students will not have been able to engage in their usual level of training during lockdown. So could you spend time working on specific steps and specific techniques out of hold, ready for when students can return to dancing together? If we look at an example from a previous One Dance UK webinar, London Contemporary Dance School said that they will not be encouraging any kind of partner work while ever social distancing measures are in place. Next slide, please, Paul. Great, thank you. So moving on to discuss floor work. So going back to that current guidance, remember that all common touch points should be cleaned regularly, and the floor may be considered a common touch point. The guidance doesn't state that you cannot do floor work. However, it is about reducing the level of risk if you do choose to include floor work in your teaching. The floor should be cleaned in between each group using the space, with sufficient time for the floor to dry to ensure students are not dancing on a wet, slippery floor. We know that many dance genres require students to travel in and out of the floor. So providing the risks are mitigated, there's no reason that you cannot include floor work. However, it might be wise to consider reducing or limiting the amount of floor work, or you might decide in your risk assessment to avoid it entirely for now. If you are choosing to include floor work, can you focus on technique, making the movements technically harder but physically easier? Think as well about the different types of floors. If you're outside of your usual teaching space and you're on a carpeted floor which cannot be cleaned easily, then of course that's a further consideration. So an example from Trinity Laban Conservatoire is that they will be focusing on ballet and Cunningham technique for the first term. They will still be teaching some release technique and some floor work, but certainly less than they would usually deliver. And they're focusing on those dance styles that don't require floor work. They're going to take steps to reduce risk, including cleaning the floor between each group and hand sanitizing on the way in and out of the studio. Next slide, please, Paul. Okay, so moving on to use of travelling phrases. So the guidance states that where possible, it is advised to keep socially distanced and within floor markings, which of course isn't really possible while you're doing travelling sequences. So again, we're not saying that you should or shouldn't be teaching travelling phrases. We're outlining what you need to consider if, after risk assessing, this is something that you decide to do in your classes. So students travelling one behind the other diagonally across the room, as we might usually find in a technique class, is a possible risk. And travelling in that way is not advised currently by One Dance UK's expert panel. If you are teaching travelling phrases, consider whether the students might travel side by side, for example. So that way they're avoiding moving into the slipstream of the previous person's breath. You should also consider allowing more time between the students travelling through the space. There are also further implications for clothing if you include travelling work, and that's due to the risk of droplets landing on clothing as the dancers travel through the space. So you need to consider, are the students able to change or wash their clothing immediately after the session? If they're coming to school in their dance kit and staying in it all day, as is the case in many centres at the moment, then further risk mitigation needs to be in place. Next slide, please, Paul. Okay, so finally, let's discuss some creative content for lessons over this current term at least. So of course, this will be really dependent on your situation, the setting in which you teach, and crucially, the rules that have been put in place by your school or your centre. It could be a good idea to focus on developing technique and building specific skills at this time, such as strength or flexibility, which may have been neglected during lockdown. We keep coming back to this point, but if you can make your classes technically harder but physically easier, this will help to mitigate risk, but also ensures that you're working towards the skills needed for a particular style, an assessment, a performance, an exam, whatever it is you're working on. If you do feel that you need to teach a higher intensity class, could it be shorter in length? If you're teaching an exam syllabus or specification, and I'm assuming as you're here today, you're all delivering a BTEC course, but some of you may deliver others as well, consider which parts of that specification can be taught effectively while the current guidance is in place. So it may mean shifting things around into a different order. Some of you may be teaching in outdoor spaces. So when deciding on content, you need to consider, we say, what's above and what's below. In other words, the floor surface and, of course, the Great British weather. This presents a whole other set of considerations around suitable clothing and footwear and, of course, weather contingency plans. But actually getting outside, if it's safe to do so, could be the best way to ensure that your young people still have access to dance in your setting if your practical spaces are out of the question. So if you're outside, could you consider exploring site-specific dance, for example? What styles and what tasks might be more suited to outdoor learning? If you're in a different indoor space, which I know many of you are, such as a classroom, and you're limited to what you can do by the additional spatial restrictions, consider what will be engaging and what will be purposeful to teach in that space. And again, this depends entirely on your students and your setting. So a few ideas that you may want to explore: a more gestural dance style, such as tutting, storytelling through gestural movement, referring to professional practitioners, creative starting points for choreography, getting your students to create dances that begin with just one body part, for example, or using the desk and the chair as a prop. And we've seen some really great Matilda-inspired work recently using desks and chairs, which has been really, really great. If you are using a prop, again, referring to the guidance that all common touch points must be cleaned regularly. So how you design your lesson content and your projects needs to be specific to your students, but some colleagues we work with are finding that really short, sharp projects lasting just a few lessons are working better in classrooms than kind of the usual 6 to 8 week half-term block. There's a huge array of dance content and performances online, particularly since the start of the pandemic. So can you use this to your advantage in a classroom setting so that students can watch and analyse a range of dance works to develop their knowledge of professional rep? At Key Stage 3, could you do preparatory work for the further study of dance at Key Stage 4, which might feed into practical work later in the school year, should the guidance be changed? As a dance or performing arts teacher, you are already exceptionally creative, so consider different approaches to your usual topics, or embrace this as an opportunity to try something different. In performing arts classes, we usually see students participating in a huge array of different tasks, including pair work and group work. So at the moment, you may need to be taking a more prescriptive approach, and this could be the time for more teacher-led work where you teach rep directly onto the students. Whereas this may not be how you would usually choose to teach, in the short term, this is still providing an opportunity for your students to engage in dance and to make progress with their technical skills whilst maintaining sufficient risk mitigation. And we saw some fantastic examples earlier from Heidi of different rep pieces that might work really well at this time. And finally, if we think about the guidance around the use of space, if you're using floor markers or a grid in your studio or your teaching space to help students maintain social distance, could that actually be used as part of the topic or the task? I've seen a really great example recently of a class doing a chessboard piece using the grid that's been marked out on the space and exploring kind of the personalities of the different chess pieces. That works really, really well. Next slide, please, Paul. So just a few more points to consider in lesson planning. So I mentioned earlier that children and young people's mental health is now considered to be at crisis point, and there's a need for that pastoral and that wellbeing support for our students. Well, we know that dance and the arts are emotive, expressive, creative subjects. So consider whether it's appropriate for your lessons to be used as an opportunity for students to explore and unpick their experience of lockdown in the last few months, or to explore some of the current world issues. And let's face it, there are certainly plenty of those to choose from at the moment. As a final consideration, none of us know what's going to happen later this year. We're seeing these changes week by week. And as we all know, this is a really fluid situation. Those changes are coming thick and fast. So can you create even a rough plan now for every eventuality, which may alleviate your stress and your workload in the long run? So at One Dance UK, we've planned all our projects for children and young people for this academic year with 5 different scenarios. Scenario 1 is kind of business as usual. All activity takes place live, face-to-face, how it would have done had the pandemic not happened. And scenario 5 is kind of worst case scenario. We've gone back into a full national lockdown and all our activity is online. And in between those two, scenarios 2 to 4, we've got, I guess, what you'd consider a sliding scale, if you like. So what we would do if there was a partial lockdown, what we would do in that project if certain groups had to self-isolate and others could attend a face-to-face event, and so on. So while that's been quite time-consuming, it means we can move forward with our project, knowing that we can move seamlessly between those different scenarios as needed. So within your planning, are you putting contingency measures in place? Should we have restrictions relaxed further at some point, or if measures are strengthened again? And as Tori mentioned previously, you may be finding that your centre is not allowed external visitors, and this may impact your ability to give your students experiences like masterclasses and workshops from external practitioners. But many companies and freelance practitioners have moved their education offer online with things like video packages of lessons or remote live workshops that can be delivered into the centre. And there's also a wealth of professional work available to view for free. So can the professional dance sector be used as inspiration for your students? Where your budget allows, paying for companies to come in or deliver something online also supports the wider performing arts sector at this really challenging time. Next slide, please, Paul. So finally, this is a really difficult time. We know that teaching is challenging and exhausting and draining at the best of times, and now it's kind of gone completely off the scale, and we know that. So it's vital that we all look after ourselves, that we pull together to keep the arts alive and to keep creativity at the heart of school life, and that we provide our students with the enriching, life-enhancing experience that only the arts can offer. And we believe that is the entitlement of every child and every young person in the country. So we just want to finish by saying that you are all amazing, incredible people, and your students are very, very lucky to have you. At One Dance UK, we're always happy to support and help however we can. So please do stay in touch. Our contact details are on the slide now, and please let us know if we can help you in any way at all. And with that, I think I am passing back to Paul.
Thank you so much, Laura and Tori, for that. That was absolutely fantastic. So detailed and thorough, and you've thought of everything. And I hope that all the teachers who have just listened to that can take something away from it and try their best to plan with confidence for this year. So thank you again for that guidance. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll just move on to the final part now, and here are some potential resources that you might want to discover and investigate if you haven't done already. All the links to these suggested websites and organisations are in the Word document in our materials section of this course, so you're able to download them and have a look at them. These companies, it's just a few, it's just a snapshot of what is out there and available, but they have been running online workshops and classes they did it throughout the lockdown period, and some are still doing it now, and they will be able to point you in the direction of new work that they have available. I know as well that Sadler's Wells, who aren't listed on here, will be showing some work by Zoo Nation next month. They'll be showing some Like It Hip Hop, for example, which you'll be able to access. And one of our colleagues, a BTEC teacher, has helped the company and Sadler's Wells with developing the educational pack. And so it will be full of wonderful information and guidance on how the work was created, how Kate Prince and the company worked together to produce the work, and analysing particular scenes, including some clips as well that you'd be able to show to students. So that is on the horizon, look out for that. In terms of theatre companies and organisations, there are lots of useful free materials that you're available to get at the moment. So through companies like through Drama Online, for example, where they collate all the online productions that you'd be able to access, most of them for free. There are also companies like Spy Monkey and Act On It, who are doing very specific work that's available online, and most of it is for free, so that's going to be useful for you. And then for production and for COVID safety, there are various links there too, in terms of the most up-to-date information and things that you can access. In terms of the support that we can provide you at Pearson, there are my details. I apologise for my face. That's the phone number that you can call if you'd like to get through to us. You can always ask for me if I don't pick up the phone. That's the email that you can contact us on, teachingperformingarts@pearson.com. And if I'm unable to help you with a query, I can pass it on to one of our senior standards verifiers. So you've heard from Heidi and Sally today, and they will be able to help. We have a communities page, which is on our website. And if you want to access it, you go onto the main page, you go to Contact Us, which is at the top, select Teachers, and then the community links are there. You can also do live chat, and you can have a little chat with me electronically, and you can also send emails there as well. And we have a Facebook group, which is managed by myself and Sally, BTEC Performing Arts Sharing Best Practice. And we've got over 1,000 members now, so please join us and share your ideas. I'm also on Twitter at Pearson Perf Arts, so please feel free to contact me on that particular social media outlet. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. I've found it really helpful. Please get in touch with us if you have any further questions or you'd like to share any ideas or approaches with us. Thank you to all the speakers today, to Sally and Heidi, for Rob for standing in at the last minute, and especially to Tori and Laura for all their contributions. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. Until the next time, good luck and take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now. Thank you. Goodbye.